So now that we have a very extensive list of logical fallacies and confirmed biases, we can continue. Oh, and don't think that list is anywhere near complete. And remember, Kristi,
to define the terms, I'm going to go ahead and call patriarchy a social system in which power is held by men through cultural norms and customs that favor men and withhold opportunity from women.
I will allow that definition as long as you will hold to it and not run off into equivocation.
In contrast to this, I want to put up political egalitarianism, which is where the members of a society have equal standing in terms of political power or influence.
That would be a no. Political egalitarianism is a concept that all persons should have the same opportunity to achieve influence, not a demand that all must have influence, sans effort and or ability and or desire.
So here, I'm actually going to use egalitarianism as the null hypothesis to measure whether or not patriarchy has an influence.
So you're not going to be using the political egalitarianism you just ill-defined for that purpose. Very well, egalitarianism, the position that all persons be held equal in society.
So if everything is egalitarian and 50-50 or equally distributed in a fair way, that's egalitarianism.
I'm sorry, the answer was socialism. Egalitarianism is not the equal distribution of commodities or political power. It is also not a demand for equal outcome, but a belief in equal opportunity.
So therefore, the null hypothesis is men and women hold an equal number of positions of political power or influence in elected positions. That would be the egalitarian social system.
Wrong again. An egalitarian social system is not what you're talking about. If you're talking about political systems, that is a false equivalence. And as I have already said, an egalitarian political system affords everyone the opportunity. It does not guarantee everyone the outcome.
The alternative hypothesis is men hold a disproportionate number of positions of political power or influence in elected positions. And that, if we can reject the null hypothesis based on the evidence, then we have to accept the alternative hypothesis.
Wrong in so many ways. The alternative hypothesis being that society/politics, depending on which one you're talking about now, is patriarchal. Well, first, the opposite of egalitarian is totalitarian. The opposite of patriarchy is matriarchy. And you really don't science because the alternative to a failed hypothesis is not accepting an untested alternative hypothesis. The failure of political power not being socialist, or as you say, egalitarian, does not mean the only alternative is patriarchy.
In terms of operationalizing these terms, I don't think that egalitarian has to be exactly 50-50. I think there's obviously a range of distribution that's acceptable. So for the purposes of just creating some lines, I'm going to say that distributions that are within 45% to 55% distributed between men and women are close enough to be considered egalitarian.
Again, political systems that concern themselves with equal outcome are socialist, not egalitarian.
Whereas if men hold anywhere above 56%, but for this one we're going to look at 56 to 100%, that's an indication of a patriarchal system.
Without taking into account any other factors than the result and calling it the cause. Don't worry, we'll circle back to this.
And I'm afraid I'm going to have to focus on US data, but if you want to, you can go ahead and use your own country's data and apply this analysis and see how it works out.
You do not get to hold that a single regional political system represents all political systems, as if all political systems are synonymous. Your sample size is too small.
In this slide, I've presented the percent of men and women in the House of Representatives since 1917. And I've put an equality zone there in the middle, which kind of has that 10% range between 45 and 55. And anything that's red above that line is patriarchy.
No, I believe the key indicates male, not patriarchy, two terms that are not synonymous.
And I don't think it's a controversial statement to say that when there's 100% men in a body, it's patriarchal.
False, but then again, we will circle back.
So as you can see from this evidence, the House of Representatives has always been and continues to be a patriarchal institution. It is dominated by men, and it is men who hold power and influence. The US Senate, similar pattern, with just fewer seats, and you've basically got the same overwhelming evidence that the US Senate has always been a place where men have held a disproportionate amount of political power and influence.
Now we can circle back. You have failed to account for so many factors. A. How many women voted for men and how many for women? B. How many men voted for women and how many for men? C. What psychological factors would lead women to vote for a man or for a woman? D. What psychological factors would lead a man to vote for a woman or for a man? E. What laws are in place enforcing men-only participation in politics versus what laws are in place enforcing equal participation? F. How many women chose to run in elections compared to how many men? G. What issues did men's platforms consist of? What issues did women's platforms consist of? And how did this affect voting? H. Etc., etc. You have not evidenced patriarchy. Your single comparison conclusion only masks the evidence that men tend to be elected more often. For any of a number of reasons you have not bothered to examine.
Given this analysis, we can reject the null hypothesis that men and women hold an equal number of positions of political power or influence in elected positions in the US. And since we reject that based on the evidence, we must therefore accept the alternative hypothesis that men hold a disproportionate number of positions of political power or influence in elected positions. The conclusion, therefore, is that the US Congress and Senate have always been patriarchal institutions and remain so to this day.
You have provided no such evidence.
We can also see this in terms of who gets to wield power in the form of committee chairs. So here's a picture from 2010 of all of the individuals appointed to chair committees in the US House. And as you can see, they are all white men. These are the numbers for the House and the Senate in 2015. And as you can see, out of the 41 people appointed, only 3 are women. That because Congress and the Senate have historically operated on a seniority system. Now, seniority in and of itself, of course, is not sexist.
And thus, your red herring is not now proving political patriarchy, but rather complaining about a seniority-based political structure. And that structure is not sexist, even though you labeled your slides patriarchy.
I want you to close your eyes for a second and imagine.
No, this is supposed to be scientific evidence, and science is not based on closing your eyes and imagining.
When did women members of Congress get their own restroom? 2011. Women in the Senate have only had their own bathrooms since 1993.
Another red herring, which goes no way toward proving a political or practical patriarchy, since you have already shown that the overall demand for private executive restrooms for women has been quite limited.
So just in terms of the infrastructure, you can see that the building was clearly designed with the idea that women would never hold political power.
Or that women's expectations of who should hold political power has changed over time. A possibility you haven't even examined, correct?
The last thing that I'm going to point to in terms of qualitative research are the accounts of women themselves who have experienced sexual harassment or sexism in some form.
Nope. Anecdotal accounts are not scientific evidence, and I'm not even going to entertain it for the sake of your listening and believing.
My conclusion. Given its institutional and physical barriers to women's equal participation, the U.S. Congress demonstrates the symptoms of a patriarchal institution. And given the reports of elected women of their experiences of sexual harassment or discrimination, we can conclude that many elected women experience Congress as a patriarchal institution. Therefore, This is an example of patriarchy right now that's happening, that's influencing people's lives, and it's determining the shape of American politics in many ways.
Your conclusion does not follow from the evidence you have provided. Your research fails to take in an adequate sample size. It is not nearly as robust as you claim. It relies on hearsay, self-reporting, and does not take in all factors that might account for the phenomena under examination. The terms used are defined strictly without taking into account actual usage, often expanding and contracting in meaning as the conclusion requires. And although the pertinent biases are declared, they are not factored into the result. Overall, your research is rife with non-trivial errors, and I would unashamedly reject it for publication at this or any other time. But I know someone who will appreciate your level of research.
Hello, my name's Kent Hovind.